I spent 2 years believing my husband worked 80 hours a week for our future in the Hamptons, right up until I found a second phone in the pocket of his Burberry coat with a message on the screen that read, "Is your little doll asleep yet? Waiting for you in the penthouse." The coat was a camel Burberry Kensington, the one I had dry cleaned twice, because Mark insisted the collar kept smelling like subway air. He was particular about things like that. Particular about his Oxford cap toes being placed on the rack by the door, not left on the mat. Particular about the temperature of the apartment, always 68 degrees, never 67, never 69. Particular about silence when he was processing something important, which, in his estimation, was most of the time. Mark Aldridge, 34, Vice President of Structured Credit at Harrington and Cole Investment Bank. When we met at a mutual friend's rooftop party in Williamsburg, he told me in the first 10 minutes that he'd closed a leveraged buyout deal that week worth $112 million. He said it the way some people say they'd had a good sandwich for lunch, casually, with a small smile at the corner of his mouth, like he was mildly embarrassed by his own excellence. I was 27. I had just landed my first major fintech client, a payment startup that paid me $60,000 to rebuild their entire user experience from scratch. I told him that. He nodded and said, "That's cute. UX, right? Like buttons and colors." I laughed. I actually laughed. That is the detail I keep coming back to. Not the gaslighting that came later, not the second phone, not the penthouse on Long Island. It's that laugh. The moment I decided his dismissal was charm. We were married 14 months after that rooftop party at a venue in Hudson Valley that cost $43,000, $30,000 of which came from my savings account. Mark said it made more sense financially because his liquidity was tied up in deferred compensation. I understood that. I was a professional. I understood how compensation structures worked. What I did not understand then, and what took me 2 years to see clearly, was that Mark's entire method of operating in our marriage was the same as his method of operating in a deal room. Identify the leverage. Apply pressure at the precise point where it costs the other party the most, and walk away with everything. The leverage, in my case, was my own ambition. He figured that out early. Not in a calculated, premeditated way. I don't think Mark was ever that deliberate about his cruelty. It was more like a reflex. He had grown up in Greenwich, Connecticut, the second son of a man who'd made his money in fixed income and never let anyone forget it. Mark had learned before he could drive that the only currency worth accumulating was status, and that the surest way to accumulate status was to make everyone in your immediate orbit feel that theirs was insufficient. So when I came home excited about a project, and in those first months I came home excited often, because I was good at my job and I knew it, Mark listened with a very particular expression. Not boredom, exactly. Something more precise than boredom. A kind of patient tolerance, the way a senior partner sits through a junior associate's presentation before pointing out the fundamental flaw in the second slide. "That's great, Evie," he would say. And then, "Did you eat? You look thin. Have you been sleeping?" And, just like that, the conversation was about me, my eating, my sleeping, my anxiety, my tendency to overwork, and the thing I'd wanted to share was gone, replaced by a clinical inventory of my inadequacies. I told myself this was care. I told myself a man who noticed whether I was eating was a man who paid attention. The Tiffany cufflinks were my idea. He'd been promoted to VP in March of our first year, and I wanted to market with something he'd actually use. I spent 3 hours in the Tiffany flagship on Fifth Avenue, standing under those blue-white lights, and I chose sterling silver rectangular links engraved with his initials, MJ. They cost $840. I wrapped them in blue tissue and left them on his pillow with a card that said, "For the man who never stops building." He loved them. He said they were the most sophisticated thing anyone had ever given him. He wore them to the office the following Monday and texted me a photo from the elevator, him, in his charcoal Tom Ford suit, cufflinks catching the light. I saved that photo. I looked at it often in the months that followed, in the way you look at evidence after a verdict, not to understand the outcome, but to understand how completely you misread the beginning. He started wearing those cufflinks exclusively on nights when he came home very late, or not at all. I noticed this around month 7. I filed it in the back of my mind under probably nothing and kept working. My agency was growing. I'd hired 2 junior designers and a project manager, and we'd landed a Series B fintech client based in San Francisco that paid us $180,000 for a 12-week engagement. I was working 60-hour weeks myself, not because anyone expected me to, but because the work was mine in a way that nothing else in my life felt mine anymore. Mark noticed the hours before he noticed the revenue. He noticed them the way he noticed everything I did, as a variable that affected his comfort. "You're never present," he said one evening in October. He was standing in the kitchen in his undershirt, eating leftover sushi I'd ordered because I'd been on a client call through dinner. "I come home after a 14-hour day dealing with actual systemic risk, and you're on your laptop at 10 p.m. designing icons." "I'm designing a payment flow for 300,000 active users," I said. "Evie." He set down his chopsticks. "I'm not trying to fight. I'm saying, in a marriage, you have to choose where you put your energy. You just worked 14 hours. That's different." I looked at him across the kitchen island. "How?" He picked up his chopsticks again. "You know how." That was the sentence he used when he didn't have an answer but couldn't admit it. "You know how." It implied a shared understanding that didn't exist, a consensus I had supposedly agreed to without knowing the terms. I went back to my laptop. But I stayed up until 2 a.m. that night, not because of the client deadline, but because I was afraid of what I would say if I stopped working and sat with him in the silence. The pattern escalated in the second year. The later the hours, the more refined the cruelty became. He came home one night in February. I know it was February because I just sent final deliverables to a client and had opened a bottle of wine to celebrate alone at 1:15 in the morning. His Oxford cap toes hit the rack by the door. He loosened his tie without looking at me. "I just closed a round," he said. 40 million. Bridge financing for a healthcare REIT. He walked to the kitchen and poured himself 2 fingers of Blanton's. "Long day." "Congratulations," I said. I meant it. Even then, even after everything, I meant it. "Please." He held up one hand, not looking at me. "Please don't tell me about the new fonts tonight, Evie. I'm asking you that as a genuine request. We closed 40 million today. I need the room to decompress." I wasn't going to talk about fonts, I said. I was going to say congratulations and ask if you wanted me to heat up dinner. He looked at me then, finally, and his expression was the same as it always was when I failed to perform the role he'd assigned me, a mixture of disappointment and something that looked almost like pity. "We're on different levels," he said. "I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because you need to understand the reality of what I'm managing every day. The scale is just, it's not comparable. You get that, right?" I said yes. I said yes because I was tired and because the wine had made me soft and because I had not yet understood that every time I said yes, I was giving him the permission he needed to say it again, louder, next time. The worst night was in April. I'd had a panic attack on a client call, my first ever, triggered by a last-minute contract dispute that threatened to pull an $80,000 project. I'd handled it. I'd handled it well, actually called my lawyer, drafted a response, resolved it within 4 hours. But I was shaken afterward, and I made the mistake of telling Mark. He listened. He sat across from me at our dining room table, and he listened with his hands folded and his eyes on me, and I thought for a moment that this was the version of him I'd married. Then he said, "Evie, your anxiety is going to become a liability. Not just for you. For me. Do you understand what it looks like for someone in my position to have a wife who panics on calls?" If my colleagues' wives heard that, he stopped. Shook his head. "I should have listened to my mother. She told me you were too high-strung for this life. I defended you. I want you to remember that I defended you." I went to bed at 8 p.m. I lay in the dark and I counted the crown molding details on the ceiling of our Upper West Side apartment, the apartment I had helped furnish and the lease of which was in both our names. And I tried to locate the exact moment when I had become someone who needed to be defended. I couldn't find it. That was the problem. The erosion had been so gradual, so artfully paced, that there was no single moment to point to. There was only the accumulation, 100 small withdrawals from an account I hadn't known was being drained. The Tiffany cufflinks. The late nights. We're on different levels. The mother he'd told about my anxiety. The way he introduced me at his firm's events. This is Evelyn. She does design, as though design were a hobby. A macrame class on Wednesday afternoons. I lay in the dark and I thought, I need to know. Not yet what to do. Just, I need to know. The night I found the phone was a Tuesday in early November. It had rained all day. That particular New York November rain that isn't dramatic, just relentless, coming down in a fine gray mist that soaks through everything without the dignity of being a proper storm. I had been in back-to-back calls until 7, and then I'd ordered Thai food and eaten it at my desk and kept working because there was a product launch in 3 days and 2 of my developers were still debugging a prototype. Mark texted at 8:43, running late. Don't wait up. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, I genuinely wasn't angry. I was in a flow state, the kind where hours disappear and you surface and realize your coffee has gone cold twice. I finished the session notes I was writing and closed my laptop at 10:15 and felt the specific exhaustion that comes from good work. Clean, a little hollow, satisfied. He came in at 11:50. I heard the door, heard the specific sound of his Burberry hitting the arm of the chair in the entryway. Not the hook, the arm of the chair, which meant he was either very tired or had been drinking, or both. I was in the kitchen getting water. I heard him go straight to the bathroom. The shower came on. I walked out to the entryway. The coat was on the arm of the chair, exactly as I'd imagined it, pulled there, damp at the shoulders. I picked it up to hang it in the coat closet. Not looking for anything. Not suspicious, or not more suspicious than I had become in the past 6 months, which was a low-grade suspicion I had trained myself to dismiss as anxiety. The very anxiety he'd told me was a liability. The sound was a single low vibration, like a phone set to silent receiving a notification. It came from the interior breast pocket. I stood there for maybe 3 seconds. The shower was running. The white noise of water on tile. I reached into the pocket. The phone was small, unremarkable, a prepaid Android, the kind you buy at Walgreens for $29 and load with a prepaid plan. A burner phone. In New York, in certain contexts, this phrase has a specific cultural meaning. Everyone who has ever watched a crime drama knows what a burner phone is and why someone carries one. The screen was lit. The notification banner showed a preview, a text from a contact saved only as a heart emoji. Is your little doll asleep yet? Waiting for you in the penthouse. Below that, visible through the banner, a location pin. A building address on Long Island. I looked at the bathroom door. Still closed. Steam beginning to drift under the gap. I took out my iPhone. I photographed the burner phone screen, the notification, the address below it. Then I opened my iPhone's Files app, navigated to a folder I'd created 8 months earlier and labeled Tax Documents 2023 and uploaded the screenshot there. The folder was not, in fact, tax documents. It was a folder I'd created on a night when I'd felt unsafe and hadn't had a word for why, and I'd never put anything in it until that moment. I put the burner phone back in the breast pocket. I hung the coat in the coat closet. I went to bed. When Mark came out of the shower, I was lying with my eyes closed and my breathing even. I heard him check his coat pocket, one quick movement, the rustle of fabric. Then the sound of him getting into bed, careful not to wake me. I lay there for 2 hours after his breathing deepened. I lay there and I thought about the heart emoji and the word penthouse and the address on Long Island, and I thought about the cufflinks, and I thought about we're on different levels, and I thought about my mother-in-law telling him I was too high-strung. And I thought about the $43,000 wedding where I'd paid $30,000 and thanked him for managing the logistics. I thought, I am the CEO of my own life, and I have been operating without a board of directors. That ends now. I want to be precise about what came next, because this is the part that people always get wrong when they tell stories like mine. They make it dramatic. They make it hot, the confrontations, the crying, the ultimatums. That is not what this was. What this was work. The first call I made was at 7:15 the following morning, from the corner of Amsterdam and 74th, walking in the direction of my office. I called a colleague, a woman I'd met at a creative directors summit 2 years earlier who worked in-house at a media company and had been through a divorce. I told her I needed the name of the best divorce attorney in Manhattan. Not the most famous. Not the most expensive. The best. She gave me a name. Diana Reyes, partner at Reyes and Kaufman on Park Avenue. She told me Diana had the kind of reputation that made opposing counsel settle before depositions. I called Diana Reyes's office at 9 a.m. and spoke to her assistant. I had an appointment for the following Monday at 6:30 p.m., the only slot outside normal business hours, chosen because Mark had a standing Tuesday client dinner and a Monday evening call with Tokyo. Diana Reyes was 51, Puerto Rican, with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses she wore on a thin gold chain. Her office had a view of the MetLife building and a credenza with 3 framed photos, 2 kids at various ages, one of her at what looked like a half-marathon finish line. No husband visible. I noted that. She listened to me for 40 minutes without interrupting. I had prepared. I brought a timeline, dates, amounts, specific incidents. The $30,000 from my savings for the wedding. The joint account from which a pattern of unexplained withdrawals had begun, small enough to be dismissed as business expenses, regular enough to be a pattern. The Burberry coat. The burner phone. The address on Long Island. When I finished, she took off her glasses and set them on the desk. "Tell me about your assets," she said. "Separately, yours, his joint." I told her. She wrote notes in a leather notebook. "The prenup you signed," she said. "Do you have a copy?" "I do," I said. "I also had it reviewed by a contract attorney when we signed it. There's a fidelity clause." Diana Reyes looked at me over her notes. For the first time since I'd sat down, something shifted slightly in her expression, not surprise, but recalibration. "That's useful," she said. "I know," I said. She hired the private investigator through her firm. His name was Robert Park, former NYPD, and he operated with the sort of methodical efficiency that I found immediately reassuring. He didn't ask me how I felt about any of this. He asked me for Mark's schedule, his recurring locations, the make and model of his vehicle, the name of his assistant at the bank. He asked whether I knew the Long Island address. I gave him everything. Over the next 8 weeks, Robert Park documented 61 separate meetings between Mark and a woman named Sophia Chin, 26, an analyst in the structured credit division at Harrington and Cole, the same division where Mark was vice president. He photographed them at the building on Long Island. He photographed them at a hotel on the East Side. He photographed them at restaurants in areas of the city where Mark presumably felt invisible. He also, at my request, pulled the financial trail. The Long Island apartment, a 2-bedroom in a building called the Meridian, with a concierge and a rooftop terrace and monthly rent of $4,200, was paid for via a series of transfers from our joint savings account to a Shell LLC registered in Delaware, which in turn listed Sophia Chen as a secondary occupant. Mark had been paying for his girlfriend's apartment with money from our joint account for 14 months. Diana Reyes filed a motion to preserve marital assets 3 weeks into the investigation. She did this quietly, through paperwork that Mark had no reason to connect to divorce proceedings. He didn't even know about the motion. On the advice of Diana's financial counsel, I opened a separate personal account at a different bank and began directing my business revenue there. Not hiding assets, every dollar was documented and declared. Just separating mine from ours, which, legally, I was entitled to do. I signed the lease on my new apartment in Tribeca on a Thursday afternoon in late November, sitting at Diana Reyes's conference table, while Mark was on the phone with me claiming he was stuck at the office because of a quarterly audit. "Of course," I said into the phone. "Don't rush. I'll see you at home." I signed the lease while he was still talking. The apartment was a 1-bedroom on the 4th floor with exposed brick and a kitchen window that faced west and caught the late light. I paid the first month and deposit from my separate account. The hardest part of this period was not the legal work. The legal work was clean and forward-moving and gave me something to do with the precision that had always been my strongest quality. The hardest part was maintaining the surface. Mark had noticed something. Not the right thing, not the attorney, not the investigator, not the separate account. He noticed that I had stopped reacting. "You seem different," he said one evening, maybe 3 weeks into it. "Do I?" I said. I was making coffee. I had an early call with a London client. "Quieter," he said. He was watching me with the particular attention he gave things he couldn't categorize. "Are you upset about something?" "No," I said. "I've been very focused on the platform launch. You know how I get." He seemed to accept this. But over the following weeks, I caught him watching me at odd moments, at the dinner table, across the room at the holiday party his firm threw for clients and their families, at the one Sunday brunch we still had with his colleagues where I smiled and talked about our Hamptons plans for the coming summer with a specificity and warmth that I knew was convincing because I had worked in user experience for 7 years and I understood, better than almost anyone, what people need to see in order to believe something is real. He wore the Tiffany cufflinks to the firm holiday party. I watched him across the room, talking to his managing director, laughing at something the MD said, and I noticed with a detachment that felt almost clinical how comfortable he was. How settled in his own performance. The cufflinks caught the chandelier light. I thought, enjoy them. You won't be wearing them in public much longer. The annual Harrington and Cole Thanksgiving Gala was a black-tie charitable event held every year in the Grand Ballroom of the Plaza Hotel on Fifth Avenue. It was, in the social taxonomy of Manhattan finance, a significant event, the kind where the CEO of the bank sat at the head table and the firm's most senior relationship managers brought their most important clients, and where the annual charitable contribution to the firm's foundation was announced publicly, and where the internal hierarchy of the bank was legible to anyone who knew how to read a seating chart. Mark was being considered for managing director. He had told me this in October, in one of the increasingly rare moments when he spoke to me about his career with something approaching genuine feeling rather than performance. He needed the gala to go well. He needed to present his annual portfolio review and announce the team's contribution to the charitable foundation and look to the assembled board of directors and senior leadership, like the man they were already investing in. I had been asked to handle the digital presentation for the gala. This was not unusual. My agency did design and digital production work, and Harrington and Cole had been a referral client for 2 years. I'd built their annual report layouts, their internal UX systems, their investor presentation templates. The gala request came through the head of communications in October. Could my team build an AV-ready slide deck for the keynote presentation, including the managing director candidate's portfolio reviews, formatted for the Grand Ballroom's projection system? I said yes. I sent a proposal. It was approved. I built the presentation myself. I worked on it over 3 weekends in October and November while Mark thought I was catching up on client projects. The slides were immaculate. I am very good at what I do, and what I built was genuinely beautiful, clean data visualization, precise typography, the kind of design that makes complex financial information feel both authoritative and legible. Slides 1 through 46 were exactly what the communications team had requested. Slide 47 was not. I will not describe the content of slide 47 in terms of satisfaction or revenge, because those words don't capture what I felt when I built it. What I felt was accuracy. The overwhelming sense of assembling a complete record. 61 documented meetings. Bank statements showing 14 months of transfers to the Delaware LLC. Screenshots from the burner phone, not only the initial message I'd found, but others, photographed by Robert Park over the weeks of the investigation. Corporate card statements showing expenses at the Meridian charged to Harrington and Cole under the category Client Entertainment. A copy of Sophia Chen's Harrington and Cole employee ID badge. This slide was not speculation. It was not emotion. It was a dataset. I built a trigger into the presentation file, a specific keystroke sequence that would advance to slide 47 from any point in the deck, bypassing the normal linear progression. I was the one controlling the projection from the AV station. I'd set it up that way from the beginning. My laptop, my cable, my system. The evening of the gala was the second Friday in December. The Grand Ballroom was extraordinary, 20-foot ceilings, gilded everything, the kind of room that was designed to make everyone in it feel like the stakes were proportional to the architecture. Women in floor-length gowns. Men in white tie and black tie, a few in the kind of bespoke suits that were identifiable to anyone who knew what to look for. I wore a dress I'd bought specifically for this evening, a Vera Wang off-shoulder column gown in dark midnight blue, the kind of dress that is not trying to be noticed, but is impossible to ignore. My hair was pulled back. My jewelry was minimal, pearl earrings that had been my grandmother's. Mark saw me getting dressed and said, "You look excellent tonight, Evie." It was the first compliment he'd given me without qualification in months. I said thank you. I meant nothing by it. We arrived separately. I needed to be at the venue early to set up the AV, and Mark had client cocktails beforehand. I was in the grand ballroom at 5:30, running cable, testing the projection system, confirming the throw distance with the plaza's AV technician. When I looked up at the 30-foot screen above the stage, I thought about the resolution. I had built the slides at 4K. Everything would be extremely clear. The dinner was 3 courses. I sat at the table reserved for the communications and technology partners, not at the head table with Mark, which suited us both. I watched the room. I ate the salmon. I drank half a glass of champagne and left the rest. Mark was at the head table, between his managing director and the CEO of the bank, a 62-year-old named William Hartley, who had the kind of face that appeared on the covers of business magazines in pieces about the future of American finance. Mark was performing brilliantly. I could see it from across the room, the particular looseness of his shoulders, the way he leaned toward Hartley when he laughed, the careful deployment of charm. I watched him wear the Tiffany cufflinks under the chandelier light, and I thought, 40 seconds. The program moved through remarks from the foundation chair, a video tribute to the year's charitable recipients, a toast from the board chairman. Then William Hartley stood and introduced the managing director review segment. Each candidate would present their portfolio performance and their team's philanthropic contribution for the year. Mark was second. He took the stage with the ease of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his own imagination for years. He thanked William Hartley. He thanked the board. He made a joke that landed. He gestured toward the screen. "Let's look at what the structured credit team has built this year," he said. I advanced to slide 1. He walked through it beautifully. Numbers, relationships, the philanthropic initiative his team had championed, a financial literacy program for public high school students in the Bronx. He was good at this. That was the thing I had never been able to fully separate from everything else. He was genuinely good at his job. The data was real. The performance was real. He reached his final slide, slide 46, a summary graphic that ended with the phrase, "Harrington and Cole, built on trust." He paused there for effect. I pressed the key sequence. Slide 47 filled the 30-foot screen. There is a specific quality to silence when it descends on a room that has been full of noise. It isn't absence of sound, it's the presence of everyone simultaneously deciding not to speak. That is what happened in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel on the second Friday of December. For approximately 4 seconds, nobody moved. I watched from the AV station. I watched Mark on the stage. I watched the exact moment his eyes went to the screen. He turned the way you turn when something behind you changes, instinctively, and then he saw it, and the expression that crossed his face was not one I had seen before. Not anger. Not even shame, exactly. It was the expression of a man looking at a door that has just been sealed from the outside. He turned back to the room. The room was looking at the screen. William Hartley, at the head table, had set down his fork. I walked from the AV station to the stage. Not quickly, I was not running. I walked at the pace of someone who has somewhere to be and knows exactly how to get there. I picked up the microphone that Mark had left on the podium. He was still standing there. He didn't move. I think, in that moment, the calculus of his options was running so fast that it produced paralysis. There was nothing to do, no play, no counteroffer, no deal to close. Mark always said we were on different levels, I said into the microphone. My voice was steady. I am aware that this is the detail people find most striking when I tell this story, and I want to explain why it was steady. It was steady because I was not angry. I had spent 8 weeks moving past anger into something much more useful, which was clarity. He was right, I said. We were. I set the microphone back on the podium. I looked at William Hartley. He had his reading glasses in his hand, he had taken them off, and he was looking at the screen, and then he looked at me, and I held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, which is long enough to communicate something without making it into a performance. The HR documentation regarding Harrington and Cole Policy Section 4, Paragraph 3, concerning relationships between supervisors and direct reports, has already been submitted to your compliance office, I said. This is a courtesy notification. I turned to the room. Good evening, everyone, I said. I walked to the exit. Behind me, I heard the specific sound of William Hartley speaking to someone to his left, a low, controlled voice. The voice of a man who operates under pressure, and what he said was, "Get security and lock down his badge. Right now." I did not look back. The lobby of the plaza at that hour was almost quiet, a few couples waiting for cars, a concierge on the phone. I walked through it toward the Fifth Avenue entrance and pushed through the revolving door, and the December air hit me, dry and cold and absolute. A black Tesla Model S was idling at the curb. The window came down. Christopher Chris, as I'd known him for 2 years through a mutual professional contact, leaned across the center console. Chris was general counsel at Meridian Capital Partners, a competing firm, and he had been introduced to me 14 months earlier by Diana Reyes, who described him as someone whose judgment I trust, which means you can too. He was 41, methodical, the kind of person who read the secondary sources first. He had helped Diana's team trace the Delaware LLC and identify the full scope of the asset transfers. Not because he was doing me a favor, but because he found financial concealment genuinely offensive from a legal and ethical standpoint. He had a quality that I had almost forgotten existed in men I knew. He was interested in my opinion for its own sake, not as a reflection of his own. He got out of the car and opened the passenger door. Not a gesture of possession. A gesture of acknowledgement. The difference is legible to anyone who has been on the wrong side of it. "How was the presentation?" he said. "Well attended," I said. I got in the car. We drove downtown through the park, and the city moved past the windows in its December darkness, bright and cold and real, and I thought about the grand ballroom behind us and the slide, still probably visible on the screen, and Mark standing in front of it. And I felt something that I want to be accurate about, because I have told this story enough times now to know that people expect me to say I felt triumphant. I did not feel triumphant. I felt complete. Like a file that had been open for 2 years had finally been closed and saved and properly labeled and archived. That's the closest I can get to it. For months after the gala, the final numbers looked like this. Mark was terminated from Harrington and Cole without severance, effective the Monday following the gala, for violation of firm policy sections 4.3 and 7.1, governing personal relationships between supervisors and junior staff, and for the unauthorized use of corporate resources, specifically, the corporate card charges classified as client entertainment that Robert Park had documented over 14 months. The compliance investigation that William Hartley initiated that evening took 11 business days to complete and conclude. I was not involved in it. I didn't need to be. The fidelity clause in the prenuptial agreement was enforced by the court in January. The Shell LLC and its Delaware registration had made the asset transfer traceable to the point where Mark's own corporate lawyers told him, according to what Diana Reyes later shared with me, that there was no viable defense. The court ordered the return of all transferred funds plus interest, totaling $81,000. Mark's reputation on Wall Street, which he had spent 11 years constructing with the precision of a load-bearing structure, collapsed in the particular way that such things collapse in small professional worlds, completely and not quietly. The finance industry is large in terms of capital and small in terms of people, and the gala had not been a private event. Within a week, the story had moved through the networks that matter in that world: alumni groups, ex-colleagues, LinkedIn connections, the specific grapevine that exists in Midtown offices where everyone has at some point worked next to everyone else. I received, in the weeks following, approximately 40 messages from professional acquaintances. Several of them were from women I barely knew who said versions of the same thing: "I'm glad you did it that way." Mark could not find employment at any firm that competed in the space he'd occupied. A few months later, I heard through a mutual contact that he was doing consulting work, the kind of project-based work that exists in the margins of an industry that no longer trusts your judgment. He found me on a Wednesday morning in February, outside my new office in Soho, a second-floor space on Crosby Street that I had leased in January, once I had the capital clarity that comes with finalized legal proceedings. I was walking in from the direction of the subway. It was cold and clear, the kind of winter morning that makes the city look clean. He looked terrible. Not disheveled in a dramatic way, just diminished, the way certain materials look once they've been exposed to the wrong conditions. The suit was expensive but wrinkled. The shoes were unshined. He had lost weight. I saw him before he saw me. I had approximately 12 steps to decide how to handle this, and I used them efficiently. Evie. He was standing near the building door. His voice was, I want to describe this accurately, his voice was not the voice of a man asking for something. It was the voice of a man who had been rehearsing something he needed to say, and who was now saying it because the alternative was continuing to carry it. You destroyed my career, he said. You took everything I built. It was one mistake, Evie. I made one mistake. I stopped walking. I did not remove my Chanel sunglasses. The morning light was coming from the east, and I didn't need to. You made approximately 61 documented mistakes, I said. Over 14 months. The first one may have been involuntary. The subsequent 60 were a payment plan. He opened his mouth. I didn't touch your career, Mark, I said. You transferred marital assets to a Delaware LLC to fund an apartment for a subordinate and charged the rest to a corporate card and called it client entertainment. Your career responded to your own decisions. I simply made the documentation available to the people who needed to see it. He stared at me. You always had rules, I said. You applied them to me constantly. Accountability. Excellence. Performing at the level of the room you're in. I paused. I filed the report according to your rules. Case closed. I walked past him and through the door. I did not look back. My agency billed $2.1 million in the 12 months following the gala. This is not a brag. It is a measurement. It is the answer to the question Mark asked, implicitly, every time he told me we were on different levels. How much is your level worth? 2.1 million. In 1 year. Doing work that I controlled, in a space that I designed, with a team I built and trusted. What I understand now, that I did not understand when I was standing on that Williamsburg rooftop laughing at his dismissal of my work, is this: the most precise form of financial abuse is not the money someone takes from you. It is the confidence they take from you in the value of the money you make yourself. Mark didn't primarily steal $81,000 from our joint account. He primarily stole 2 years of my belief in what I was worth. The $81,000 came back via court order. The belief came back slower and on its own terms, and it came back because I stopped waiting for someone else to confirm it. I think about the Tiffany cufflinks sometimes. Whether Sophia Chin knows where they came from. Whether he still wears them. I hope he does. I hope he wears them to his consulting meetings and feels the weight of them and remembers the night at the plaza when the room went quiet and the screen held everything he'd tried to hide, rendered at 4K resolution on a 30-foot display. That was my design. That was my work. We were, indeed, on different levels. I moved into the Tribeca apartment on a Saturday in January, in the late afternoon, when the light through the west-facing kitchen window was orange and almost horizontal, the way winter light is when it finally comes, brief and specific, and lies across whatever surface it finds. I stood in the kitchen with a mug of coffee and looked at the light and did not think about Mark, or the gala, or the Delaware LLC, or the burner phone. I thought about the project I had open on my laptop, a new client, a healthcare navigation startup, 300,000 users, a problem I didn't yet fully understand and was therefore very interested in solving. I sat down at the table in the orange light, and I opened my laptop and I got to work. That is the full story. And now I want to ask you something, because I've been sitting with this for months and I still don't have a single answer that satisfies me completely. A lot of people, when they heard what I did at the gala, said it was excessive. That it was the right result, but the wrong venue. That a business dinner full of colleagues and clients was not the appropriate place to surface a personal betrayal, that it should have been handled through attorneys and courts and private proceedings, which, to be clear, it also was. The legal process ran parallel to that evening, not because of it. But here is the thing I keep returning to. Mark chose a very public stage, a career built on institutional trust, on managing other people's capital, on performing integrity, to conduct a very private deception. He used our joint account. He used a corporate card. He used his position over a subordinate. He made our marriage part of his professional infrastructure when it suited him, and he expected it to remain invisible when it didn't. So was the gala the wrong place? Or was it exactly the right place? The only place where the scale of the accountability matched the scale of the deception? Was 2 years of systematic gaslighting something that should be resolved only in a courtroom, quietly, out of sight? Or does the public nature of the betrayal, the institutional dimensions of it, the colleagues who worked under him and around him while this was happening warrant a response that those same colleagues could witness? Tell me where you land in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story gave you something, a moment of recognition, a word for something you've been carrying, a reminder that precision and patience are their own form of power, hit like and subscribe. The next story I'm going to tell you is about a founding team, a stolen product, and what happens when the person who built everything gets written out of the company. It's longer than this one. The ending is better. See you there.